Hello everybody, today we're going to be learning about the scientific revolution. Specifically, we'll be talking about what the scientific revolution was and what caused it to happen. Goals, these are the main things I want you to get out of watching this video. So what was the scientific revolution? The scientific revolution was a shift in how European intellectuals thought about and studied nature, resulting in new breakthroughs in science and technology. This revolution, like most revolutions, was actually a process that took place over a long time, and the scientific revolution is usually thought to have occurred from 1550 to 1700. It's one of the most important intellectual advances in human history. It increased the power of European societies relative to the rest of the world because it gave them sweet new technologies that the rest of the world didn't have. And it resulted in increasingly rapid technological development and social change. As new ideas and new technologies come online faster and faster, the society in Europe also begins to change very rapidly. And sometimes this leads to instability in Europe. So to understand what the science brought about by the scientific revolution was like and why it was so important, we should compare it to what ancient science was like. So first of all, ancient and medieval science, basically the way people thought about the world up until the scientific revolution, viewed the world as static. Basically, that truths are taken to be are basically believed to be known and eternal and 100% right. If it's written down in Aristotle, then it's right. Modern science, on the other hand, views knowledge as something that's continually evolving. So in modern science, new, better ideas are always popping up and replacing old ones. Also, ancient and medieval science was non-mathematical. There was some mathematics in ancient science, but really not very much. They relied on logic and reasoning, but not very much on actual mathematical observation. On the other hand, modern science was super mathematical. Basically, their idea was that we should base as much of our knowledge on mathematics as possible because math can reveal hidden patterns in the natural world. Ancient science assumed that nature had a purpose and intentions. So this meant that everything in the universe behaved the way it did because that was how it was supposed to behave. So for example, they believed that an acorn turned into an oak tree because that was what the acorn was supposed to do. That was its job. Likewise, people believed that an arrow flew through the air because the arrow was intended to hit a particular target. So this gives like the purpose and intention to everything in the natural world. On the other hand, modern science believed that the world was made up of lifeless matter, and that stuff happens because of physical laws and not because of purpose or intention. And the arrow flies through the air not because the arrow wants to hit its target, but rather because that is just how matter happens to move through space. Ancient and medieval science relied on observation and gut feeling. So people would look at the world and then also kind of try and make sense of it just by like how things seemed, how their gut told them it was. So for example, in ancient science, people assumed that the sun went around the earth because that was how it seemed. The sun seems like it's moving. Likewise, they assumed that heavy objects would fall faster than light objects because that seemed to make sense. On the other hand, modern science relied on observation and experimentation and ignored gut feelings. So basically it said, it doesn't matter how things seem, we want to use observation to prove one way or the other how things are. And so rather than just assuming that heavy objects fall faster than lighter objects, they actually tested it. And they actually proved that this wasn't the case, even though it seems to make sense. Also, modern scientists built tools to increase mankind's ability to observe the universe. This is stuff like telescopes and microscopes and other interesting pieces of technology that let us view the world in new ways, so we can make new observations and new scientific breakthroughs. So this was clearly a big change in how people thought about the world. Now we're going to talk about the causes for this change. What was it that caused Europe to go through the scientific revolution in the 16th and 17th century? Well, so there are four big factors that I want you guys to think about. One is Europe's cultural connections to the rest of Eurasia. 2 is the Renaissance. 3 is the voyages of exploration, and 4 is the rise of absolutism. So this is kind of connecting all the stuff we've been talking about for a long time up to this one big advance in how people view the world. So let's start with Europe's cultural connections. So the idea here, guys, is that Europe was not all by itself. In fact, the connections that Europe had with the advanced societies of Asia gave Europe many of the tools that it needed for its scientific breakthroughs. China gave Europe the printing press, which allowed for the ideas to spread. And so basically, because people can spread their ideas more easily, it makes it easier for people to come up with new ideas. So the printing press is one of the crucial technologies that helped the scientific revolution to occur. India gave Europe the Indian numeric system, which is the one we still use today, like 1, 2, 3, 4 digits. And it also gave the concept of zero. And these two advances, which occurred in India, made advanced mathematics possible. And without advanced mathematics, it would not have been possible to make the new breakthroughs of the scientific revolution. And the Middle East gave Europe both astronomy and alchemy. And astronomy gave important techniques and concepts to European stargazers, which they would use. And alchemy gave the basic chemical techniques to Europe, which would form the foundation of chemical experimentation and eventually the science of chemistry. Second cause, actually, is the Renaissance. And so the Renaissance is important because the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman ideas boosted European knowledge. So it took Europe from the Middle Ages and gave them a whole bunch of new ideas which they could use basically to advance their understanding of the world. One big thing that happened is that ancient philosophical ideas changed the way medieval Europeans thought about the world. So two really important ideas that came out of ancient Greek philosophy were skepticism and atomism. Skepticism argued that the world of appearances could be deceiving and that maybe we really didn't know anything just by looking at stuff. And the atomists argued that all of reality was actually made up of tiny pieces of matter. Both of these ideas were really important for the development of the scientific method, which assumed that we don't really know anything about the world and we need to test it, and that the world is made up of lifeless stuff. Also, the humanists who became important during the Renaissance argued that human beings could make themselves better through reason. And the advances of the scientific revolution are basically just an extension of this humanist idea. Basically that we can make humans, we can extend human knowledge by using our reason to understand the world around us. Here's a picture of Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine, which didn't work, but does show the curiosity about new technologies and new ideas that existed in the Renaissance. The third cause of the scientific revolution is the discovery of the New World. So the discovery of the Americas is important, first of all, because it shook the foundations of many Europeans' understanding of the world. So before the discovery of the Americas, most Europeans thought they knew the world really well. Of course, they didn't because they were missing an entire continent. And so this discovery basically shakes them and wakes them up and says, hey, there's lots of cool stuff going on in the world that you don't know. Second, it proved that many ancient writers were wrong, and this forced Europeans to rebuild their knowledge of the world from scratch. Also, new species of plants and animals expanded Europe's understanding of biology. And last of all, wealth from the New World and from trade with the New World helped to fund scientific research. The cause of the scientific revolution was the rise of absolutism in Europe. And this is all related to the idea that knowledge is power, which, by the way, was a popular quote during the time period. And so basically the wealthy absolutist rulers like Louis XIV, who you see there meeting the Academy of Sciences that he paid for, understand that scientific knowledge will increase the power of the state. And the state that can control science can probably become more powerful than its neighbors. And this makes sense for a number of reasons. For example, better maps, which you get from better astronomy, means more control of your empire. Better statistics means more efficient government and tax collection. Better chemistry means better gunpowder. All of these things lead pretty directly to greater power for the king. So it's worth his while to pay for science. And it's because of royal funding that some of the greatest scientific advances of the time period are made, because people by themselves cannot afford observatories or laboratories, but kings certainly can. Also, scientific breakthroughs increase royal prestige. So if a king pays for a laboratory and that laboratory finds a way to cure a sickness or to feed people, then the king can take credit for that discovery and argue that he is helping all of mankind to grow more prosperous, which of course is what the king will need to argue if he wants to stay in power in the long run. So we see actually an alliance between scientists and kings. The kings pay the scientists, and the scientists reward the kings by giving them more power and prestige with their discoveries. And so here are your video goals, guys. You should be able to answer these questions now that you've reached the end of the video. I hope you found this fascinating.